my role in the civil service, I work at the Cabinet Office. The Cabinet Office is the headquarters for government, for running the government. We're responsible for three core things. One is the maintaining and the security of the nation, including the democracy of the country. So we deal with constitutional issues, what happens when votings happen and various things like that. We run and organise the Prime Minister's and the government of the day's priorities, and we run and organise those across government departments. So we organise government's ability to deliver government's policy. And then we also organise as, we kind of operate as the headquarters of government from a corporate point of view. So we are the bit that is responsible for how the civil service is run, how we're organised, and all of that I'm kind of sharing with you what the civil service is. On the basis that actually it is absolutely core to understanding why it is that we want to be the most diverse and inclusive organisation we can, and we have a strapline in our strategy that you can get hold of through some of. If you get in touch with me, we're really happy to make sure that everybody has as much access to our strategy as possible. But the our underpinning priority for the civil service is to be the most inclusive employer in the UK, and we set ourselves that ambition to be that by 2020, so no pressure then. And the major aspect of that, the major aspiration of that, comes from the fact that if government isn't leading the way, if government isn't taking charge and really understanding what it should be doing around diversity and inclusion, then really there is a very, we really wouldn't be delivering for the country. And I think that point about business is really core, and it's one of the things that we find in the civil service, and actually I think probably more across the public sector, is that there is an enormous value drive for our workforce. People don't come and work in the public sector for the money. They, by and large, come and work in the public sector because of that sense of public service and the greater good. And so the public, meeting the needs of our public, that is our business. That is what we are here to do. They are our shareholders, if you like. They are the people we're accountable for, to. And so that understanding of the business that we are here to deliver underpins, if you like, I think the work of all civil servants to a large degree. I mean, there is all of the other aspirations and things that people have that drives their work and where they work and what they're there to do on a day-to-day basis. But that is, I think, a really, really fundamental aspect of who we are as a civil service. So what is the civil service? I mean, who are we as a civil service? We're about 400,000 people. We have people that operate across the country. We are responsible for the outcomes of 64 million people that live in the UK and abroad. And we have, our workforce is largely based in the UK, but a significant proportion is based pretty much in every single country in the world, bar a couple of diplomatic exceptions. And there are a huge variety of types of work that we do. So our middle managers they constitute about a quarter of our workforce, so just in the region of about 90 to 100,000 middle managers that you would call. Our executive management or our executive leadership cadre wakes up just under 1%. So in terms of where the thinking is, where the value base is, who is actually running the civil service, actually it's 90 to 100,000 people that are managing and leading 400,000 people to do a whole variety of jobs. We do everything from supporting people find work in job centres to finding the latest antidote to anthrax at Public Health England at Porton Down. We do all the things. For example, we have mechanics who work on tanks in the army. We have people who make policy, like me, in Ivory Towers in Whitehall. We have a whole variety and diversity of type of function. So therefore, our managerial community, it is not a homogenous blob. So we can't be treating them like one. So when we're trying to talk to them about diversity and inclusion, helping them understand why it's important for their day-to-day work, and it's exactly the points that Simon was making, and actually I fully endorse and agree with everything that's been said so far, so I'm not going to try and repeat all of that, although I will refer to it. That is the environment that we're working in. So I think if we want our middle management to really understand and make their mark and really shift the kind of bend the curve in diversity and inclusion, we've got to understand who they are, what they're doing, what the pressures on them are. That picture that you put up, Simon, of the very busy, quite slightly kind of stressed out looking middle manager is absolutely what we have. So the kind of stretcher targets that people have. So, for example, people who manage border force staff, so people who stamp your passport as you're coming in and out of the airport. they're managing a completely different environment. They're managing in a completely different function. So their staff will be, typically they'll be shift workers. They'll be working, there'll be a 24-hour kind of issue, very often under huge amounts of public scrutiny and pressure. Within that environment, they've also got to think about D&I. Actually, what makes them think about D&I is whether or not their staff are turning up to work because they feel that's the place they want to be, whether they're actually able to fill their vacancies, whether they're actually managing to hold on to their staff, and they're actually seeing those staff develop and move on. That's what's motivating our middle managers. So that's the conversation we've been stepping into. What we found a few years ago that all of the activities and all of the conversation about diversity and inclusion across the civil service was happening in that 1%, that top one executive community. They were having those very intellectual, quite exciting conversations that you can feel very good about, and you can feel very good about yourself. Yes, we've had a good D&I discussion. That's been really great. But actually, where you need that impact to happen is not in that 1%. It's actually, yes, to some degree it is. You want the policies and the decisions that are being taken or by ministers, advised by people that have taken into account diversity. But actually, the people who are on the ground who are actually going to be overseeing the delivery of your day-to-day business, those are the people who absolutely needed to be able to own this. So us tapping into their experience, actually understanding their day-to-day pressures has been absolutely key and critical. And what we're not suggesting, and what I don't do, is to suggest for a second that it's me that's going to understand all of that. So that delegated approach, Simon talked about it with your governorships, your deputy governorships. We have 36 different types of government department that actually oversee over 160 different organisations within the civil service. And it's that cascade, the responsibility that sits at those levels and their accountability for diversity and inclusion that is driving the change. So I'll talk a little bit about what the infrastructure looks like and as build, telling you a little bit about how that accountability works. So we've taken the view that actually what we've had to do is to really tackle and understand the infrastructure. What is the environment within which we're trying to make D&I happen? What are the mechanisms that we use day to day to manage our organisations from a people and corporate point of view, and how do we build in and mainstream expectations around diversity within that? So we've put in place a much stronger approach to transparency and accountability. So we now publish all of our data about diversity and inclusion. To be fair, we published it before, but you had to have a degree in ONS and stats to be able to find it. But now we publish that data on our website. It's accessible to people. It's analysed data. It's not tables of data in the way that Simon showed. We too do that. But actually that's used directly in relation to the conversations around performance in the organisation. So at every level in the organisation, there are conversations advised by data and also wider intelligence. So what we've done is to build an assurance model. So we're building this assurance process where we ask every government department to identify what their plans are, what their strategies are, what their capability is to deliver it. Do they have the right teams in place? Do they need further skills development? So the job we do from the centre as diversity leads is really about facilitating people to be leading change at that local level. We've put in place objectives, so every senior civil servant, so that top 1%, and every single manager, so that 90%, all of them have direct diversity and inclusion objectives that relate to their business plan. So their business plan for their business unit will have to have within it their objectives around diversity and inclusion. So individuals' objectives connect to the organisational plan for delivery. So, and those are accountable for. For example, if no one is able to get a top performance score in their personal objectives without being able to demonstrate high performance in diversity and inclusion, for example. So all of those sorts of the hard lines, the kind of the sticks, if you like. Those are things that are really necessary and we've put in place, including publishing targets that we must meet. And every government department has its own targets about increasing the flow of ethnic minorities and disabled people into their most senior roles. And we've got some tracking for that and data for that. So we've got all of the infrastructure in place. And we could leave it at that. But that's not going to change the curve. That's just going to feel like a big stick, and getting beaten with that on a regular basis is no one's idea of fun. It's certainly not ever been proved to make the difference. And so what does is actually changing the culture and changing the environment within which we're operating. And again, I'm speaking to the converted, I'm sure, because you're here at 7:45 in the morning, but also you're going to be the people that are hopefully going back to the ranch and really happy to share thoughts on this. And what we know is that we've had to see significant culture shifts. And in order for us to create culture shift, we have to understand the culture in our organisations already. So I talked about if you go to Heathrow or Gatwick Airport, the culture for civil servants who work in that airport is going to be entirely different to the culture around that I work in the fourth floor at number 1 Horse Guards overlooking Parliament Square. It's a completely different culture. So of course our cultural shift has got to happen within that context. So again, trying to apply some blanket approach that is a one size fits all approach just isn't going to work. So the organic nature of how those culture shifts, those decisions are taken at that local level, and the ways in which staff, whether they're managers, whether they are local staff networks that exist, so we've got lots and lots of our diversity staff networks, and the community of engagement at that local process, or at that local level, is absolutely essential to understanding what the change is, owning that change, and then delivering that change. So what we've done is, rather than say, this is your list of things that you can drop down and do, and here's a menu of really great ideas, what we've got is a menu of processes and ways in which you can develop your own ideas, because your own ideas will be based on some core things. So there's yes, you need to do some training, there's possibly some really great events you can do. Here's a pack that you can use to start your conversation about inclusion or diversity. But actually how you apply it, how you use those tools is way more important than the tool themselves. Itself. So, for example, we have produced a whole range of slide packs that you can use in your staff meetings or team away days. You can size them from anywhere from 15 minutes conversation in a team meeting all the way through to, actually, I want to fill a 2-hour slot in our team away day, and I really want us to have a big conversation about diversity, and I really want us to have that conversation easily. We've got these tools and packs that people can use, but actually part of the utilisation of that tool is how you prepare to have that conversation, how you engage people and help them own that conversation, and it's driving that. So there's a whole range of other examples of ways in which we're creating that ownership of the change and understanding why that change is really important. So that process for getting to that decision about how you're going to have the conversation is part and parcel about understanding your problems. So understanding what your issues are. So understanding what I've less fondly these days called the wind tunnel of people coming in, your great diversity that you're attracting loads of really great diversity, they're coming in, and then at the other end of your wind tunnel they're leaving. And actually if you end up with just 2% of your great, you've attracted 25% ethnic minorities into your organisation in the last 5 years, that's great, but 24% of them have left. Then actually you're left with this 1% and you're actually no better off. What is it that you can do to hold on to that? If you've understood that, then you know the problem you're trying to solve with those tools, and you know how you're getting there. So it's that sort of empowerment that we're giving to middle managers and to aspirant yet to be managers. And I think one of the things that we found that's been really important, and I'm coming on to my third bit, it's about championing a leadership from the top all the way down, all the way up, and understanding that leaders aren't permanent secretaries in our case, so the leaders of our organisations. Our leaders are also leaders of our staff networks. We turn them into kind of civil service celebrities, and you can imagine how dull that is. But civil service celebrities, God, that's an oxymoron, isn't it? But the idea of actually our staff networks getting profile, getting on a platform, having the opportunity to post blogs and having their own space where they can communicate with the world around them. And that actually giving some kind of credibility, if you like, to the conversation about diversity has been really, really, really important. And constantly underpinning all of that with business case and understanding this is about meeting the needs of the public we serve, and keep going back to that. And certainly in London, that feels really easy because the conversations around specific aspects of diversity are really meaningful. So actually, if you're talking about delivery of the LAMI review, which was the review into the criminal justice system and ethnic minority communities, it feels really real in London. If you're talking about the gender pay gap, that feels something that feels really acute in London, because actually or the ethnicity pay gap as that comes on, that's going to have a real impact in London. But actually, the this isn't just about diversity. Inclusion is about everybody, and actually those everyday inclusions and what Tracy was talking about at the beginning of the conversation, understanding that is as much a part of the conversation. And there isn't this, we've got to move away from the idea that there's this hierarchy of issues of discrimination. So gender at the top, then it's race, then it's maybe disability, and then you have a bit of a bun fight as to what comes next. That can't be how it works. And we're moving into intersectionality, and with the move into intersectionality and understanding, I for one come from a low socioeconomic background, and you wouldn't know that, but you know I'm a woman and from an ethnic minority background. And actually some of those sort of intersections actually are far more powerful and meaningful. So the barriers for me in my career have been far more about my socioeconomic background than they've been about my race or my gender. And it's those sorts of challenges and understandings that are far more granular, far more nuanced. I think what's really exciting, and talking to our middle managers, and we talk to them on a regular basis, so we have we have a bit of a roadshow. It's again in our cheesy kind of way in which we seem to operate in civil service. We have this roadshow called Civil Service Live every summer, and it's been a bit of an odyssey. So I kind of went to all across the country. We're civil servants, we don't travel much. And so we're kind of travelling all over the country and talking to civil service. This is the third year that I've done Civil Service Live. So 3 years ago when I first did it, I asked a question of all of our civil servants. How inclusive, do you think that we're inclusive? Simple question. Most people are like, well, you know, we'd get somewhere between 50 and 60% of people saying, yes, we are mostly or very inclusive. That's kind of where we were. This year, 98%. Between 95 and 98% said we are mostly or absolutely inclusive. And when we ask them why, well, because we can talk about it. And I don't feel uncomfortable because I can talk about, I work part-time. That means that I am included. From an ethnic minority background, I wear a hijab. I don't work on Fridays because of Shabbat. I do lots of other things in my life. I can be me at work in a way that I didn't feel I could 2 years ago. And just that communication, that conversation, making it something that people can feel that they own, I think has been the shift in that. We're about to embark on some work to actually test that. So in the true civil service way that we like, we need the evidence. And so we're going to test what it is that's happened, in what the key aspects of what we've done over the last 2 years, what has actually made some effect and change. And we'll be wanting to share that report with people further down the line. But I suppose I'll finish with, my final point really, which is diversity really matters, and it really matters, certainly in our organisations, who works there. But what matters more is what it's like to be there. And that is the thing that for us as an organisation is our shift in priority. So that's where we're focusing. Thank you very much.